First Samuel 1, we'll start with verse number 9. We've been talking about always assuming the best instead of assuming the worst, looking at different places in the Bible. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord, which, remember, the temple as yet, this would be the tabernacle. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed unto the Lord and wept sore. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. It came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth. Now Hannah, she spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she had been drunken. And Eli said unto her, How long wilt thou be drunken? Put away thy wine from thee. And Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. I think that is a place in the Bible, wouldn't you think, that you assume the worst instead of assuming the best. Father, have your way in this time tonight. I pray that you would help me to be very clear and be able to explain your word. Lord, I pray that we might learn from it in Jesus' name. Amen. As a Christian, none of us are exempt from doing just what we saw, assuming the worst. It seems as if assuming the worst instead of assuming the best is just a natural tendency that comes on all of us at some time or another, and this tendency can show itself in everyday life things. You know, if somebody don't text us back right away, they must be mad. You know, I must have done something. You just automatically seem to go that way. If one of our family members is late coming home, they might have had a wreck. You know, we assume the worst. I mean, we don't assume, you know what, they may have stopped at the store and leading somebody to Jesus. We don't think that way. We think the worst. We can be out on a hike, and instead of thinking, man, this is beautiful, you know, what God has given us, our minds might, what if we get robbed out here? You know, what if a bear comes and attacks us? You know, we can get hurt in our past by somebody we're close to, so anybody that tries to get in our lives and from there on out, you know, we put up a shield and we worry about, you know, or just assume that, you know, these people are going to hurt us too. This can even go on in church. You know, if you've been hurt in church in the past, church can be going along and doing good and prospering, but in your mind, you're just assuming, well, I wonder when it's going to happen. I wonder when something's going to happen and I'm going to get hurt again in church. We can place ourselves in so much thinking on negativity that, you know, have you ever met people, they just assume everybody's out to get them? Everybody's out to scam them. And I know you got to be careful about this, but, you know, every decision that doesn't go our way, you know, they're trying to get us. They're trying to get us. The truth is, we don't know everybody's motivation, why they do or don't do things, but it seems like we'd just rather assume the worst instead of assuming the best. When they walk away, when somebody, maybe even at church, walks away from the group, you're having a conversation, what happened to them? We must have said something that made them mad. You know what? They might have had to use the bathroom. You know, they might have needed to get home. You know, if our past experiences in life can, not only church, but just past experiences in life can have a great effect on our assumptions. Just like If you've experienced a bad marriage, all men are pigs. All women are pigs. If you've had a bad marriage, you just want to assume that. Bad experiences in church. What do people say? All churches are the same. A bad experience with a pastor. There's some pastors that are rascals. Just because their name's a pastor, that don't mean they do right all the time. If you've had a bad experience with a pastor, well, all pastors are the same. And that's not necessarily true, but that's what people assume. So we develop this built-in disposition in life that, you're either for me or you're against me. And it's all based on our assumptions. If you disagree with me, then you're against me. If you don't do what I want you to do, then you're against me. If I don't get my way, then you must be against me. And all of that could be far from the truth. But we base things a lot of times, and then our feelings come with it, all based on just what we assume. Now, can we live without assumptions? Probably not. But the key, we do assumptions every day. If you're going fishing and you're assuming it's going to rain, you're going to take a raincoat. Now, it may not rain, but we make assumptions all the time, and we make decisions based on those assumptions. But with people, and judging people, and looking at people, and thinking those things, the key is to incorporate 1 Corinthians 13, where it talks about love. And if we'll do that, we'd all be so much better off. Love suffers long. Love is kind. Love doesn't envy. Love doesn't boast. Love is not proud. It doesn't behave itself unseemly or unbecoming. Doesn't seek our own. It's not about us or our own conceits or our own ways. Love doesn't get provoked easily. Love doesn't think evil. Now, if we felt this way and loved this way, it'd be really hard for us to always assume the worst about people. We could think we're a devoted Christian. After all, we come to church every time the doors are open. With that assumption of ourselves, it can also make us think those that don't do as we do, we can assume they don't love the Lord like us. We don't know where people's hearts are at. We want to judge where people's hearts are at. We want to assume where they're at. I'm going to tell you something. Some of the meanest, sneakiest, contriving, backbiting people you'll ever know go to church. That's the way it is. Now, not everybody's like that, but there's some mean people that go to churches. And the truth is, the people that go to church all the time, that don't mean their heart's right with God. Just because, you can go to church all the time and not even be saved. You can see in people's lives, if you watch people you don't really have to assume. You can see the pride that's in their life. You can see how they talk down about other people, and they think they're way on another pedestal. They're up here and you're down there. You can see the jealousy that they exhibit if something don't go their way or something ain't like they wanted in church. You can see how they treat people and how they disregard some people while embracing other people. Now, you can't tell me you're right with God when stuff like this is going on. And that's not assumptions. That's truth. People say, we deserve this, they don't. And all this creates a negative thinking about and assumptions about other people. Now, if we want to poison relationships, if we want to poison churches, then assume the worst and it'll do it. You'll do it. Now, some people that we can think the worst of, they've kind of proven themselves to be that way. That don't mean they can't change, but their past actions have showed what they really are. And hopefully those people will change. But again, the key is loving, like 1 Corinthians chapter 13 says. So, here in our passage, we see a great woman of God. Her name is Hannah. And there's a priest, somebody that you would normally suspect that this guy, he's a fine fella. He's on another level. He's close to God. But he's going to assume something awful of this godly woman. Hannah's name means favor or grace. She is one of the two wives of a man named Elkanah. Her husband was a polygamist. And this was a time where it was part of the human culture, but rest assured, this was never God's design. Hannah's life was situated in the time of the judges. There was no king in Israel. So, he talks about going down to the temple. This is not the temple. It hadn't been built yet. So this is the tabernacle. It's a time of turmoil and confusion. Israel is very vulnerable to their enemy, the Philistines, at this time. Judges 17:6 describes this time. In those days, there was no king in Israel, but every man did what was right in his own eyes. That's dangerous, isn't it? That's a dangerous time. This is repeated in Judges 21 as well. And during this time, the priesthood was corrupt as well. The nation was weak. And we see in 1 Samuel chapter 3, and the word of the Lord was precious in those days. There was no open vision. So hearing from God was rare during this period of time. Visions weren't coming on a frequent basis. So God isn't saying much, and the nation needed a great leader. But even during this time, we see Hannah's husband. He's not perfect. None of us are either, but he was a believer. He was a follower of God, and he loved God. According to verse 3, he went up yearly to Shiloh to offer the sacrifice to the Lord. Eli was the priest at this time. He had two sons listed in verse 3. Their names was Hophni and Phinehas. And they were corrupt. They were wicked men. To see how wicked they were, 1 Samuel 2:22, they had relations with women that assembled at the door of the congregation. Now, the tabernacle of the congregation, I should say. You imagine, these guys are evil. They're supposed to be priests. They're not living like a priest ought to live. And in verse 4, Elkanah is in Shiloh, and he offered his sacrifices, and he gave some of the meat to his wife Peninnah, and he also gave portions to her sons and daughters, which were his. But in verse 5, Elkanah shows favoritism. He gives all these people a portion, but man, to Hannah, he loads her up. He gives her a great portion, a bigger portion. So it's evident that this husband loves Hannah and probably thinks of Hannah a lot more than he thinks of his other wife, Peninnah. And maybe he thinks of Peninnah, he knows Hannah's barren. She can't have children. Maybe he thinks of this woman as somebody that could have children so they could have a family, they could have a future, they could have an inheritance. But his real love is Hannah. And Hannah's described as somebody that the Lord had shut up her womb. So evidently, God allowed this to happen, created this to happen. She's barren. She's unable to have children, which again makes me wonder, is that why he took the other woman to be his wife? So in order to raise up an inheritance. And we see in verse 6, there's a conflict within the family. Now, who would have ever thunk that? You got two wives, and everything's going to be joyous. If you got one wife and everything's joyous, you're doing good. Ain't that right? Well, Chris is about to shout, but his wife ain't here. Peninnah is described as Hannah's adversary. She's a woman that's causing Hannah anguish, distress, affliction, and trouble. She would provoke Hannah unmercifully. She would cause Hannah to fret, which means to tumble or crash. It means irritated. And all of this was centered on Hannah's inability to have children. Now, you know what? This lady seems heartless. I mean, she seems mean. She had to be a Baptist, I'm sure. And she would rub it in Hannah's face. Basically, I got children. You don't. You can't have children. And we see in verse 7 that this harassment went on year after year as they would go up to the house of the Lord. Here would come this provoking, agitating woman again, irritating Hannah, pouring salt in the wound. And Hannah longed so much to have children. But up to this point, God didn't allow it to happen. And as this provoking was going on, we see in verse 7, Hannah just bursted out and started crying. This was getting to her. She wouldn't eat because she was so upset. And in verse 8, her husband noticed this. He's like, Hannah, why are you crying? Why aren't you eating? Why is your heart so grieved and broken? You know, her husband, he's got a heart. He's concerned about Hannah. And he tries to rationalize things. You know what? Husbands, we all know rationalization don't always work with an upset woman. Can I get a witness? And then he tells her this, am I not better to you than to 10 sons? Hannah, I'm good to you. Now he is sympathetic. He's trying to boost her. We all know that don't always work. He feels her pain. He knows what's going on with the other woman and how she's treating Hannah. But you know, sometimes ain't the right times to tell your wife how good you are to her. Now, he's doing it the right way, and I don't think she got upset about this. But what was going on in Hannah's life had absolutely nothing to do with how good her husband was to her. She knew that. She was being harassed, she was being provoked, and she was irritated by this other woman. She couldn't have children, and this was absolutely heartbreaking to Hannah. To be able to have children, especially in this time, it was a huge deal. And I want you to notice, we never see Hannah, this godly woman, go off on this other lady. Nothing's ever said in the Bible. We never see Hannah go off on her husband concerning this other woman. She never tells her husband, you just don't get it. But what she does is seen in verses 9 and 10. When the meal was finished, she gets up, she goes to the tabernacle, and she prays about it. You know what? What if we were to handle all our issues in life, marriages, church, work, and everything else like this? We don't have to post it on social media. Well, I don't understand that. I don't know. You know, I don't get that. I don't know why people post their life on social media. You got problems. Why are you putting it on there? You know, why don't you just pray about it? She didn't go off and talk to everybody else. You know what this lady's doing to me? To live a life where we're not going around telling everybody else our problems. You know, it is good sometimes to have somebody to confide in. But some people want to tell the world. And when you're telling the world, you know what? You're going to get all kinds of advice. And you get all kinds of advice. Some of it's got to be wrong advice. You know, but it never ceases to amaze me how people want to get and spread their problems, try to get people on their side. This would sure be better for us. It would cause less conflict, less confusion, and less schisms if we just said, you know what? I'm just going to take it to God. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to be mean about it. I'm not going to threaten the other woman. After all, this other woman, that all she's been doing to her, we never see Hannah saying, you better do something about her or I'm out of here. She don't have that attitude. We never hear her saying to the other woman, say one more word and I'm going to be on you like white on rice. We never see that. Hannah is humble, but she's broken. She's not been able to eat, although she may have ate a little bit after speaking to her husband about this. She waited till the meal was over with at least to get up and leave. Sarah is all over this lady. What's she do about it? I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray. And with a godly woman like this, I don't care if you're a man, woman, I don't care if you're a child, whatever, we can all learn something from this. Because one of the first responses we have is spout off. Somebody gets us, we're going to get to them. You know, post something, say something, get people, you know, all up in an uproar. She's taken a lot. And in verse 10, the Bible describes more of how she's feeling at this point. It says that she was in bitterness of soul. This is laying heavy on her. I mean, she's crushed. She begins to pray, and she's just weeping uncontrollably in her prayer. But one thing about it, Hannah knew where to go. She knew the resource to go to in her brokenness. Her faith was constant, even in her brokenness. And in verse 11, she vowed a vow in this prayer and made a promise to God and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, remember me and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child. Then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come. Hannah knew it was God and God alone that could release her barrenness and allow her to have a child. And in this prayer, she prays specifically. She says, God, bless us. No, it's a lot more than that. She gets down to specifics. She's asking God, would you look on the affliction of your handmaid? She doesn't say, God, look at all I've done. Look at all these years I've lived for you. Look at all the miles that I've traveled even to come up here to sacrifice. I've been a good wife to my husband, none of that, but humbly before God. You know how she identifies herself? I'm a handmaid, I'm a slave. I'm just your slave. And in her prayer, she knew that God could give her a baby boy, and that's what she's praying specifically for. But not for selfish reasons. She also says, God, if you'll give me this boy, I will give him back to you. She wanted this for herself, but she wanted not just for herself, but she wanted to give him back to God. Her desire was to have this baby boy, give him back to God for a consecrated and God-centered life. He would be a Nazirite, which means he would not cut his hair. There would be no concern for his physical appearance. He wouldn't drink any wine or alcohol, but he would live dedicated and consecrated to God. Hannah desired greatly to be fulfilled as a mother. And she wanted to produce a son so she could say, here you are, God. I want to give him to you. So basically, God, if you'll grant me my request, I'm promising I'll give him back to you. Now, I don't think any of us could doubt this is an amazing, godly woman. I mean, she's got it right. But then things take a turn for the worse. As she's praying, weeping, pouring her heart out to God in verse 12, Hannah continues to pray to the Lord. Eli was watching her. He's looking. And have you ever prayed like that? You know, words coming out. Or just prayed silently. You know, you might be in a group of people. Maybe your mouth's moving. Maybe your mouth's not even moving. But it's still prayer. And in verse 13, Hannah's speaking in her heart to God. And you know what? You know what this tells me? You don't have to pray out loud. Does God hear me if I'm just praying silently? Well, according to this, he does. And so her mouth's moving. Eli can't hear none of it. And you know what? Eli wasn't a good high priest. And he certainly lacked discernment. He didn't even keep his sons in line, who were doing some horrible things. We know in chapter 2, a man of God came to Eli and prophesied that this would be a sign to him that would come on his sons, that in one day, both your sons are going to die. That God said he would raise him up a faithful priest that shall do according to what was in God's heart and mind. And in chapter 4, lo and behold, the Philistines came. They stole away the ark of God. Eli's 2 sons were killed. And when Eli got the news about all this and how the ark of God was captured, he fell off his seat backwards and broke his neck and died. Eli was an old fat man. You say, we shouldn't say that. Well, the Bible describes him as heavy. So I'm assuming you can't be heavy without having, some extra rolls around you. And when his daughter-in-law, who was pregnant, heard that the ark of God had been captured, and her father-in-law and her husband was dead, she went into labor, had a son, named him Ichabod, which means the glory of the Lord is departed from Israel. And going back to her story, when Eli saw her praying like this, but not hearing her words, you know what? His assumption was, we got a drunk in here. We got a drunk. Now that's a fine how do you do from the spiritual leader, isn't it? Here's a broken and crushed woman that's pouring her heart out before God, and the spiritual leader don't know the difference between a broken woman and a drunk. That's pretty sad, isn't it? So Eli's going to let her have it. He's going to make judgment on her. Verse 14. He thinks he's playing a spiritual role, but the reality is he's going based solely on his own assumption. He says, how long are you going to be drunk? Put away the wine. So he's assuming. I know exactly what's wrong with this lady. Because, I ain't hearing nothing. She's just moving her lips. She's drunk. He don't know what's going on at all. And you know what? We really need to be careful when we try to play a spiritual role in other people's lives, when in reality, we don't know what's going on in their hearts, and we don't know what's going on in their lives. And we're often quick to just assume. It's easy to be an Eli. Sit back in our spiritual chair, look down on others, judge somebody based on assumptions, and even let them have it. Now, all that Hannah has gone through, she surely don't need the spiritual leader to give her what for. Do you think? I mean, he don't have no proof. He don't smell no alcohol. She ain't been stumbling around, showing any signs. He's just assuming. Ain't no words coming out, so she must be drunk. Can you imagine Hannah at this point? I mean, we'd all be ready to pull her hair out at this point after all of this. Tears are flowing down her cheeks, bound on the altar, crying out to God in silent prayer, and all of a sudden, somebody interrupts your prayer and says, "How long you gonna be drunk? You need to leave off the sauce. You need to quit drinking." Hannah responds to Eli in verse 15. Now, I'm going to tell you something. If any preacher or spiritual leader done this to us at church, I about guarantee you that'd be the last time you ever showed up at that church. And you'd probably give that preacher a word or two before you left the church that day. We'd probably be furious. I'm never going back to that church. But I'm going to tell you something. Hannah is so gentle. She's so godly. She's so humble. She hasn't struck back in everything that she's been through. We ain't seen her one time strike back. And she's not about to start now, but she simply says, "No, my Lord." She even talks to him respectful. Can you imagine somebody doing that to a Baptist today? "You old goat, I ain't drunk at all." She don't lose her cool, but she explains to Eli, "I'm not drunk. I'm just a woman that has a sorrowful spirit. I haven't drunk any wine or strong drink. What I've been doing is pouring my heart out before the Lord." And she continues in verse 16 and tells Eli, "Don't count your handmaid as a daughter of Belial." She's letting Eli know in a kind and humble way, you've misjudged me in your assumption of what I am. She don't want to be thought of as a daughter of Belial, which can mean worthlessness, evil, wicked, or naughty. And how often are we guilty of looking at people from a different lens than what they really are, based on our assumptions? You know what? How many times have we said, I don't trust them? But if we got down to the facts, we don't have any reason not to trust them. We just assume we can't trust them. Now, people give you a reason not to trust them, then that's different. But again, you go back to 1 Corinthians 13, you still love like that, regardless. We don't have nothing concrete not to trust them. How many times we say, I think they're hiding something. We ain't got no proof they're hiding anything. But based on our assumption, we think, they're not very friendly. And how many times have you got to know people when you thought they wasn't very friendly and they turned out to be some pretty good people? But you just assume, man, they stuck up. They won't talk to nobody. How about, I don't think they're as good a Christian as they let on. Well, what are we basing that on? Now, if they've given us a reason to not think they're very Christian, then that's one thing, but just by, something don't sit well with me. I just don't think they are what they act like they are. We're often way too ready, quick to judge like Eli was, without first finding the facts of what's going on to start with. And the truth is, you know what? All of this could have been handled real simple. Eli could have came right down by Hannah, bowed down by her, and said, hey, are you okay? You know, like sometimes people come to the altar and people put their arm around them. You know, if we come to the altar and somebody puts their arm around her, I know you're a sinner. I know you've been doing things you shouldn't. You better pray. That ain't going to sit very well. That's not going to, you're just assuming because you don't know what's on their heart. You don't know what's going on in their life. Like that one preacher, he said one time this guy was praying to get saved, and that boy's daddy was over there saying, you better pray, boy. Look like you're going to hell in spite of all we can do. How'd you like to be on the altar needing to get saved and somebody saying that? How about him just going down there and saying, hey, you okay? Hey, can you tell me a little bit about your burden where I can kneel down here and pray specifically with you? Join you in prayer. He don't do none of that. You need to quit drinking. You're drunk. None of that. You need to leave the bottle alone. And this is coming from the spiritual leader in Israel that can't even keep his own sons in line, and he's assuming somebody else is doing bad. Sometimes we might need to evaluate our own lives before we start casting haughty stones at other people. Every time we point a finger at somebody, there's three pointing back at us. And Eli may have felt a bit bad when Hannah told him what was really going on. And so in verse 17, he said, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you've asked of him. You know what I don't hear out of this? I'm sorry. I should have never thought of you that way. I shouldn't have assumed this of you. All it was, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant your petition. You know what? Hannah means business. She's serious. And in verse 18, so full of grace, she said, let thine handmaid, thy slave, she's talking to the priest. She said, let me find grace or favor in your sight. To a man that's just accused her of being on the bottle and drunk. She's better than most of us, don't you think? After she prayed about it, you know what she did? She left it there. She gave it to God. Often we'll come and pray about things, and before we leave the altar, we done picked it back up and worrying about it again. She left it with the Lord. She went and ate. And in her presence, she had the countenance of no longer being sad, no longer being broken. She refused to be bothered any longer. She had true faith. God, I'm giving this to you. I'm trusting you with this. And she didn't pick it back up. And in verse 19, she got up with the family the next morning. She worshiped before the Lord before going back home. And God heard this woman's plea. She's been blasted by the other woman. It's got very irritating. She's been falsely accused by the priest. But God always knows what's going on. And God always has the last say. And God saw Hannah's brokenness, and he allowed her to have a son she asked for. You know what his name is? Samuel. The only thing she desired out of Samuel. I want to give him back to God, for God to do with him what he wants to do. You know what? What if mamas and daddies felt this way about their kids? I just want them to serve the Lord. Well, I want my kid to make a lot of money. I want them to have a lucrative career. I want them to be some famous athlete, some famous singer, or to be a professional of some kind. Whatever happened with the greatest desire of a parent, my greatest desire is I want them to serve God. I want them to love God more than they love anything else. Hannah got to become the mother of one of the greatest men in the Bible, Samuel. She did give him back to the Lord. And you know, Samuel became the key spiritual figure and prophet between Moses and the prophets Elijah and Elisha, in between. Samuel instructed Israel to be rid of the false gods that they'd been worshiping. He was bold. He could speak out. Samuel's leadership and God's power, they were able to overcome the Philistines. He was recognized as the judge over Israel. Samuel anointed Saul to become Israel's first king. And you know, when Saul was disobedient, Samuel was brave enough to tell him, God sought out a replacement for you. And Saul continued to be disobedient, and it was Samuel that even denounced him as king. Samuel anointed David to be king. And all of this came about by a broken woman who poured her heart out before the Lord, asking God for a son to give him back to him. She was misjudged. She was mistaken by the so-called spiritual crowd. She was misunderstood, but she never lost her faith, and she continued to trust God. And you know what? Boy, did God let her have some young'uns. She had 5 more after this. But the spiritual leader of Israel, only based on his assuming the worst instead of assuming the best, really misjudged this woman. And as Christians, we got to be careful that we don't do the same. Assuming the worst instead of the best can lead us into places and thoughts and judgments that we should never have. And folks, if you've been hurt, if you've gone through things, you know what? Your best place to go is not be a keyboard warrior, but go to God. Your best place to go is not spread it all over the church. Go to God. It's not trying to gather people to be on your side to agree with you. Go to God. That's what this woman did. And that's what we all should do, really. That'd be our best place to be in. Any questions on this? Comments? Thank you, Bill. Praise the Lord. Yeah. Anything else? Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Get some history in there. I like Bible history, don't you? Learn what's going on and stuff. I hope you've learned something by this tonight. I hope to see you Sunday. All right? Invite somebody to come with you. They won't eat you. Just all they can do is say, you know, they won't eat you. Try to get somebody to come. All right? I love you. You're at Liberty. Chair party right up the hill here. Chair party.